So a few words of introduction. So my name is Björn. I manage Current Consulting Group out here in Asia. I'm based in Hong Kong. I have a background both in supply chain and in risk management. I've worked in various positions in quality control, logistics, purchasing. I've worked a lot with brand protection, investigations, and corporate security. I've been out here in Asia since 2001. The last 6 years now in Hong Kong. That's a little bit about me. We might get back a little bit to my experience and how Current Consulting work in these difficult times. Stefan?
Well, some of you will know before, some of you there is new people, and I'm very glad to have the opportunity to meet you all. My name is Stefan Holmqvist. I've been working within the logistics and transportation business for the last plus 25 years. I'm originally from Sweden. I have been here in Asia and in China and in Hong Kong for the last almost 20 years. Been working with logistics living in Shanghai, Singapore, and in Hong Kong. Mainly working for transportation to and from China with Western companies that either sourcing, producing in China, shipping to overseas, or selling into China. So of course, for today's focus is not on the COVID-19 itself, because we're not doctors, but how it has impacted the supply chain. How we see some of our clients have solved it in a good way, the experiences we have learned on the way, and also opportunity, of course, within the forum today, we can share experiences with each other and to learn and to become better together. We saw, of course, how this has impacted the whole global supply chain. And today, of course, with China as the powerhouse of production, when it started in China, it's quickly spread around the globe. We saw how connected the global markets are and how that started in China went out through the whole system and was not just a China issue very quickly. So this is the focus we see here today and how we can navigate this and make it better. A little bit how we start. We'll start with how do we see the statuses today? What happened? What was the effects? And then what action have we seen some of our clients do to make it better and to solve the situation, best practice? And finally, what do we foresee the long-term effects of this virus situation? Once it started here in China, we first saw it here after Chinese New Year. And of course, basically was a big close down of everything closed down. And since then, situation has become better, much better. We see most areas in China, the factories are back and running, except for Wuhan and Hubei province. Most of the other ones are back, not really full, but I would say an average between something around 90%, we see them running. They're still lacking some labor, they still have some shortage in raw material, but there is operation around in the system, even if we're not back on the level that we were before the crisis hit. And for sure, the effects will be here through the whole Q2, as we see it today. We also saw that the bigger factories came through faster. They came back to some kind of production normality faster than the smaller factories. The smaller factories had more problem overcome the first hurdles as we saw this happening. Then of course we will see now when rest of you overseas in Europe and USA and other places tragically facing this situation as well, that of course will have an impact on the recovery speed. A few weeks ago, of course, we thought that just China coming over and the demand and everything will be back to normal. That is, we will have to see how that goes now.
One interesting point to add here maybe is that the South China appears to be a little bit more cautious than the rest of the country, and Guangdong remains not in lockdown, but a lot of the regulations about movement of people are still in place. So you actually need written permission to leave your own compound now. It's not particularly difficult to get, but movements are still quite restricted. And Hong Kong, of course, have now gone to a very cautious approach, similar to many countries in Europe, where travel in and out of Hong Kong is actually severely restricted.
That's correct. And as Björn says, it's been very much regional. And we saw, for example, Shanghai was back much faster than Ningbo. Ningbo took much longer time and are still behind Shanghai in terms of production and movement. But we have seen, of course, it has improved a lot since we were here in a few weeks ago. When this happened, not just the factory stops, but of course the whole transportation and logistics was very badly hit. And to start with, the international transportation was not a problem. The main problem was the local transport in China, where the government closed down a lot of the roads with road permits, road checks. A lot of the drivers were back in the home village, could not get back. So a lot of the capacity was not there, and the capacity that was there could not travel freely. And even when you opened up, you could travel. You had a lot of road checks. That means maybe a truck going between two cities normally can do 2 or 3 trips. Now they could just do 1 trip because all the stops along the way. So I would say today we are back to almost normal, not fully normal, but almost normal. Now the domestic transportation is not the bottleneck anymore. We have come over that, so that is working. For the ocean freight, through this whole situation so far, even we have seen a lot of capacity taken out from the trades by the carriers, but due to the lesser demand and the lesser volume shift, it has not so far been a problem with the capacity. It's been okay with capacity for the vessels, but we also know a lot of capacity is taken out. So that means if we're looking forward, it may become a problem once factories up and running and demand is there. Because basically during this crisis, we saw in February, like for example, for USA, the volume fell over 20% and we're back to levels that we were 4 or 5 years ago. So it's a major drop. And all carriers actually taking out capacity now. When we are capacity-wise, we are between 25 to 50% is taken out from different trades. And we also have a situation where the carriers having the equipment in the wrong place. Because what happens was when China stopped the ship out, that meant no equipment was coming to overseas. So now we have a surplus of containers in Asia, while Europe and US has a lack of containers to send back. So also this will take quite a while before we see it balance out again.
So Stefan, I can anticipate a question here that a lot of people in our audience are probably contemplating. How does this change pricing for the various modes of transportation?
If we see what happened if we start with the road transport, during the crunches, the price for the road transportation went up a lot. So the capacity became very expensive. For the people who bought FOB, didn't really saw it at that time because that was for the factories to pay, but the price went up quite a lot. For the ocean freight, we haven't seen a huge impact yet, but I think it may come along the way once the demand is pulling up again. But if we look on the air freight, that's a completely different story. Following all the restrictions from the different governments, where we basically today have almost like 95% of the passenger flights standing on the ground somewhere. No matter if it's in Hong Kong or if it's in Europe or USA, a lot of the passenger flights are grounded. And a lot of the cargo is carried as belly cargo on the passenger flights, and all that capacity is now basically gone. And we are left with freighters and some passenger flights even flying without passenger, with cargo only, even if it's just a few of them. But that has caused a major lack of capacity, and the air freight rates is really soaring at the moment, and the capacity is lacking. And this will also take time before we come over. And we also saw a lot for the rail freight. A lot of demand increased. Of course, this is only a solution for Asia to Europe, not Asia to USA. But actually, it was the most robust transport mode that had the least impact during the crisis. And the demand has increased a lot as well. Also, we see a lot of factories trying to catch up lost time, a lot of importers trying to catch up lost time and moving cargo from that normally should be on a boat, going over to the rail freight to try to catch up time from where factories were standing still. If we look a little bit further here, what are the risks we see now? To close down the factories was quite straightforward. They closed the door and took people home and didn't restart. When they now restart again, we see several issues coming up that we hear from the factories and we hear from our clients around in the world. There's a lot of factories, even if they themselves are operating very early, they were lacking components or lacking of their sub-vendors. So that meant we saw how the whole supply chain, even a lot of clients importing from other places in Asia, like Taiwan or Vietnam or Malaysia, they still depend a lot on raw material and components from China. So the effect was also immediately felt outside China as well.
This is a point that we've seen and advised on several occasions in the past few weeks. The importance of asking suppliers, where do they get their raw material? Have they been forced to make changes in where the material and the products come from? The fact is that many factories in China saw themselves forced to make very quick changes and quick adaptations, and they won't necessarily come out and declare that to customers or partners unless asked or unless confronted with that question.
We also hear that some of our clients facing quality issues because the factories has, as you mentioned, been forced to change some of their components vendors or retrain some staff. So we still see issues around the whole supply chain. And we also see now there's a prioritizing for which commodities that either will get the space on planes. That is a priority, of course, for medical equipment. We see some importers and factories also reprioritize among the orders for medical equipment to naturally be ahead of non-necessity items. And we see a credit risk, of course, in the system coming through both among factories as well as transporting companies. And I think the effects of that we will see a longer forward as well. We see new regulations from authorities in terms of checking new regulation, changing regulation, and in order to check for the movements of people and goods. And we also have heard seen some increased risks of fraud following this when people are not in the working for the normal working stations, they're working remote.
That's right. So this is something that we see as well. So the basic dangers of employees working from a home setup, so away from corporate internet connection, perhaps printing out documents on your home computer, perhaps even accounting, even doing their duties from home, just opens up a whole world of possibilities for fraudsters who are out in force in this kind of situation. So we see those numbers go up dramatically. Something else we see is a lot of problems that would have occurred anyways now get blamed on the virus. This is another difficulty that we see ourselves forced to deal with, and that probably Norman as well as a company has to deal with. When is it actually a legit excuse to not deliver or not execute on a contract or an obligation? To what extent is it really the virus that is creating issues? To what extent is it a very convenient excuse, perhaps? So those combined with the general uncertainties of this situation, I say, like, calls for all of us to be very cautious about potential fraud.
Yeah. And as we said, we also see that, of course, connected to the finances. A lot of companies, of course, now, and factories and whatever it is having under hard pressure to save money. And that means you may pushing to find other options. It may be a transporter, it may be a sub-vendor or whatever, but there's a lot of pressure, and some of it is legit and some is you hiding and get all mixed into this. But we see many of these actually now coming up as a virus issue, not necessarily actually, but as a result.
That's right. The last thing I'd add there is that a lot of the fraud cases we see now actually come in the form of companies offering to help and offering a solution to one or several of these problems. So offering a quick access to products, for instance, or offering to solve a problem relating to banking or staffing is a favorite method we're seeing now, and a favorite mode of attack from fraudsters. So in effect, be very careful of anyone who offers you help with something that is difficult in this situation. Be very careful about who the person is offering help.
What costs do we also see occurring as coming from this? For sure, we see a lot of costs coming from overtime in order to try to solve part of this problem we see now, to try to fix problem that normally is easy. It can be anything from getting the factory running, to getting new vendors, to getting transport arranged, but a lot of extra overtime for people to do this. There is, of course, for many companies out here, we have extra medical expenses as well coming up in relation to this. A lot of external specialists are brought in to assist and sort out. We see extra cost in terms of hiring and replacing staff that maybe not want to go back to a province where they're not feeling safe anymore. They want to stay maybe in their home province or changing to another province. So it's cost with that. And also cost now with the government is want to protect work, make it harder to lay off people. So it's also extra cost. So there's a lot of extra cost coming up as a potential in the whole chain as well. For the logistics, as we mentioned before, it's been a lot of changes for the air freight. So you have to change, some people change cargo from ocean to air or from ocean to rail, also causing extra costs, and have to find other way of transporting, or maybe have to use other factories in other locations. The quarantine regulations also makes it harder and take longer time for people to travel, both for transport or for DTC or other matters, so also adding costs. And it will we will find some imbalance in the supply and demand, well, adding extra cost from this. We also see the new regulation coming in, and there will be more to come, and there will be cost to comply with quarantine regulations and so on for some of the operators within the market. Now we have gone through all the problematic things and the risks. So what have we seen some of our clients do that help them to overcome and to help them to get back and running, to work on it? And starting, of course, with us and with anyone else, that the first thing is, of course, to make sure that we are safe, to make sure that your own staff or your own factory or your own whatever you work with yourself or your contractor, that they are keeping safe and everyone is there and can maintain safe. The risk is, of course, for everyone that if the virus will affect your office, that you will have to close down your operation again. So communicate, have clear guidelines, both in your company, talk to your partners. What regulations do they have? Do they have any regulations? Have they gone through any guidelines to handle this? Can they work remotely, or if their office would be closed, do they have to stop the operation completely? So ask those questions both internally and with your vendors and sub-vendors down the chain. The second one is, of course, within supply chain, that once we are safe, then we have to make sure we can maintain a stability in our supply chain. We see a lot of our clients have been very good with that. They have gone back, they see, and that's mainly about communication, as we have seen it, to make sure that not just the people that is normally involved in the orders or the shipping or the logistics, but you also involve more people, so everyone knows what to expect. Because, for example, we will expect delays. There will be delays. There will be problem and so on coming on for quite a long time. Make sure that not just the purchase department knows, but also your sales department, so they're also aware of these effects coming through the chain. To communicate within your company, communicate with your forwarder, transporting company, your supplier, through the whole chain. I think that's what we have seen has been the one has been really good at mitigate the problem, has been the one has been really good to communicate openly and involve not just one actor, but many actors in the chain. And
asking the questions, perhaps particularly the obvious questions, and the facts that you thought that were already in place, and all the things that have gone right for years and years with certain suppliers or vendors. Now we find is a good time to go back and actually ask again each step of the way, how are you going to do every single action required to perform the services that your vendors provide to you? How are they going to get their components? Are they going to have any problems with machine? It's to an extent, I think this calls for creative thinking and trying to imagine what this new situation, what new problems this new situation could cause.
Yeah, I think communication, and to try to understand what exposures do you have, not just the obvious one, but also what is in the next layer in your supply chain. What can they have? What exposure do you have there? And to then try to understand and manage not just the obvious, but of course the hidden one is the really hard one. But try to make and see, once you made the first step, keep safe. The second step, communicate with the one that is obvious. But then third step, try to understand what is the next layer possible, a problem or unforeseen problem, because there will be some issues, and we have seen it. And that may be to have an option for alternative sourcing, alternatives mode of transport. Maybe you usually always do ocean freight, but can we do something else? Can we do air freight? Can we do land transport? If we have to maybe do air freight, but can we just take a part of it, or find other ways to be prepared if something happens? And to keep up to date with whatever regulations that may come, because as we said before, it's a global chain. So there may be regulations in China or in Europe or in USA that will affect the whole chain as well as we're moving forward. And then, of course, the credit risk that can come from this. So when you're working with this, I would say check and check and check again for the orders, not just assume that they are okay, but really have a good system where you involve your vendors and involve your purchase department, your logistics company, so everyone can work on the same. Either you have a system, your own system, or you have the transportation company system, or you set up an easy Excel sheet or whatever, something where many actors can see what's going on and be very, very proactive, and then have the contingency planning. If we need to reach a deadline, what other option is it there? We may have to use things we normally don't use here, and to relay that information to everyone in the chain so everyone can be active and find those options. Consider the different moods we can have here of doing it, and do expect there will be delays. Do expect for the air freight, we will not come on this yet. There will be many more before we're back to full capacity. Will take longer time. Even if some freighter capacity is coming back, we're still way below what we need to be. For the carriers on the ocean, we will see more black sailings, and they will take quite a long time until we're back, because they will have a lot of financial problems of this as well, and will avoid to sail with empty vessels or not full vessels. So go through all that and communicate with everyone in the chain, not just the usual partners. So I think this is what we have seen really much, communication. And of course, inform your clients so they also understand and can see the possible delays, that everyone can understand that the normal supply chain, that may be the factory, that may be the transportation, that may be the port, or that may be the trucking in Europe, is not running on normal speed or capacity. It is running, but we're not up on the normal capacity in the chain. If we look forward to how we predict the market going forward, as we said, there is absolutely a risk on air freight. We have already seen a lot of increases in costs, and there will be for quite a long time, and it's substantial increases from this. We will see a long-term matching problem between supply and demand for the ocean freight. These will take a long time before we are back to stability again here. There will be backlogs from factories as well before we're back. And there will be backlogs also in the transportation chain before everything is back. And we will see more imbalance coming and going in the equipment for the carriers before this is over as well.
So an interesting phenomena there is there will certainly be backlog for several industries and a lot of factories. But so far, we've also seen some factories having a lack of orders because of orders being cancelled now that the virus is traveling globally. So not all industries or areas in China appear to be the same here. And it's again important to ask the question. But some of the factories where we were expecting when we got back in about 2 weeks ago, we found actually running only at 70% capacity, not for a lack of workers, but for a lack of orders, because orders had been cancelled. So this is also a big concern for the Chinese parties now to try and anticipate what's going to happen to their order books, what's going to happen to their cash flows, now that the virus is traveling and spreading throughout the world.
Yeah, I can only agree. We see the same thing happening, that if we go back a few weeks, we thought that just when China would be over, demand would be there. But now when it's spreading, we see, as you say, also a lot of cancellation of orders, even that is orders that is ready to ship, because of course people are afraid of their consumption demands. So there will be instability, and it's absolutely happening for sure.
So we've got a question here. We're going to jump to from Nireen. Hi Nireen. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're safe. Björn, do you see any large players beginning to plan to move their manufacturing away from China because of their historic over-dependencies on China? In a word, yes. I think across the board, this has been a wake-up call for everyone with a big manufacturing base in China and anyone who had most of their production in China is now awake to the fact that this is not the way to organize your supply chain in a reliable, sustainable fashion. It's not the right time to make that move. It's just not, it's during a crisis, it's not practical to move your operational base. But we're seeing some of our clients now contemplate places like Vietnam, Thailand, Taiwan. That will be happening in the wake of this, but I think it will be in the long term. Everyone's awake to the problem. Certainly, I saw in the list of participants here, certainly among the purchase managers on the Swedish side, I see a growing awareness now of the importance of spreading your eggs a little bit and hedging your bets around the countries in Asia and not have an over-reliance on China.
Yeah, and I can agree with we see and hear the same thing. And I think also what this highlight is, as you say, Björn, that is also very, very entangled and complex. So even if you have vendors nowadays in Malaysia or in Vietnam, it's still many times dependent on components and parts from China as well. So even we saw that they had maybe production in Vietnam, they were still facing problem because they were relying on China components as well.